Elon Musk wants to fix a date to meet you. Open it quickly _ prologue, the summons hear it. A frequency slips between thought and breath, a signal rising above the static of yesterday. It is not a rumor. It is not a tease. It is an alignment you can feel in your bones. The letter isn't paper, and the time isn't a clock. The invitation comes like a knowing, precise, unmistakable, alive. Elon Musk wants to fix a date to meet you. But this is more than logistics and calendars. This is a flare over the horizon, a symbol pulled from myth and threaded into now. The architect of invention does not simply stand as a man. He stands as a principle, that truth persists, that vision outlasts doubt, that systems collapse beneath the patient weight of reality. The message arrives clean, without fanfare. Your inner chamber hears it first. Then your breath slows. Then your spine remembers its height. The hour has begun. Act 1, the resonance. You were not waiting blindly. You were not knocking at doors with numb knuckles, praying for a crack of attention. You were building, quietly, deeply, assembling a bridge out of lived truth and unshakable coherence. What looks like chance to the untrained eye is geometry to those with sight. Destiny writes in vectors and curvatures, in angles that only the heart can compute. You did not chase. You aligned. And alignment calls back without delay. This meeting is a lighthouse. It transmits that your signal, once dismissed as fantasy, is now too clear to ignore. The interference patterns that used to snarl your message into noise are dissolving. Those who laughed at your purpose are starting to stutter. And the ones who tried to bend you into their shape are discovering that reality bends back. From the first whisper to this very breath, the path has held. It was not a straight line. It did not need to be. Every detour taught your legs where true ground is. Every closed door revealed what was never meant to contain you. Every misstep, turned by the gravity of your integrity, became a catalyst. This is the mathematics of ascent. What does not break you becomes the scaffolding for your wings. Act 2, the old game exposed. There was a time when subtle hands tried to rewrite your story from the margins, when a family member, cloaked as guardian, crowned by self-appointed authority, played a longer game than anyone admitted out loud. They tracked your milestones as if tallying victories against you, not for you. They attempted bindings not with ropes, but with ritualized care, with conditional praise, with invisible threads braided into childhood and fed by repetition. They were meticulous. They kept notebooks in the mind and sometimes in drawers, sketches of your changes in mood, diagrams of your radiance, lists of moments when your defenses thinned. Their aim wasn't healing. Their aim was leverage. They practiced influence dressed as affection. They learned timing like an art form, inserting suggestions at the exact edges of your doubt, turning your pauses into their routes. But the plan had a flaw: you are not programmable. Your essence isn't a script to be edited. The more they tested the borders, the more your borders learned to glow. Their calculations never accounted for how truth self-corrects. They forgot that the heart, once it senses the texture of authentic love, refuses to confuse a velvet cage for freedom. Act 3, the partner and the plot. Your former partner was not random. They were chosen, by the hungry gravity of someone else's agenda and by the higher geometry of a design larger than any hand. The relative tried to weaponize devotion, turning care into a corridor for control. They learned your rhythms. They matched them with staged encounters, carefully placed conversations, and concerned check-ins that seemed harmless in isolation but were mechanical in sequence. The tactic was simple and cruel: reframe your love as a threat, your safety as a prison, your presence as the invisible weight dragging their future. It was never about truth. It was about steering. Each friendly call hit a filament of suggestion, each gentle comment bent angles around perception. Subtlety masqueraded as concern until the line between insight and influence blurred like watercolor under rain. And yet love is a stubborn light. It refused to put on their costume. Your bond carried a frequency older than manipulation and stronger than fear. It does not panic when fog rolls in. It remembers the coastline when maps burn. So when the haze grew thickest and the script was seconds from locking into place, the heart moved. A crack of dawn knifed the storm. Your partner woke up to the pressure underneath the pattern and whispered, "No. Not this time." Act 4. The ledger of the unseen. Just because the eye doesn't track it, doesn't mean it wasn't recorded. The guardians of integrity, seen and unseen, have watched from the edge of each scene. Every time intention turned toward distortion, it was marked. Not as a tally of vengeance, but as coordinates for correction. Cause and effect are not moralizing. They are structural. When you push against integrity, you bend your own future until it must snap back. The ledger doesn't punish. It calibrates. It holds in one hand what was attempted and in the other what was refused. It measures pressure and trajectory, then returns to equilibrium with a patience that only truth can keep. So when that pivotal moment came and your partner's awareness broke through, it did not trigger empire revenge. It simply released what had been delayed: clarity, consequence, and a corridor forward that you had already built with your choices. Act V. The unraveling awareness has a scent. Once inhaled, nothing smells the same. Your ex began to trace threads backward: late-night calls that never felt quite right, the careful timing of messages that arrived when you argued, the soft voice that always managed to plant a seed of doubt in fertile ground. What felt random congealed into pattern. What felt like intuition revealed itself as insistence from behind the curtain. The web began to tear. Long friendships that had drifted without reason suddenly looked choreographed. Opportunities that evaporated overnight without explanation began to taste like alignment sabotage. Alliances proven hollow crumbled. What once passed as coincidence now carried the clear edges of design. The relative's quiet theater lost its lights. Backstage became visible to everyone with eyes willing to adjust to the shift. Ripple by ripple, consequence arrived. Finances loosened from their control and flowed back toward sources that honored energy. Relationships built on the scaffolding of manipulation became too heavy for their beams and fell into quiet heaps. The health of the orchestrator, stressed by years of spiritual debt, began to show the bill. Not as doom, but as data. You cannot lift what you bend for too long. The body always tells the truth last, but it always tells it. Act 6. The return of the real. Meanwhile, a different tide turned within you. The pressure that once felt like a clamp became your forge. The badge they tried to snatch became your insignia. The more they tried to narrow your corridor, the taller your cathedral grew. Your public recognition, once a distant echo pinging around empty halls, found your address. The echo formed a chorus. And the chorus began to carry your name to rooms where your presence had been vetoed by whispers for years. What they meant to be a trap became your launchpad. You did not need to retaliate. You did not correct them with daggers. You corrected the timeline by breathing in your own truth until it filled the room and left no oxygen for lies. Integrity attracts its team. Healers who once dismissed your language began to ask for translations. Professionals who used to glance sideways at anything beyond their textbooks began to refer cases that conventional methods could not touch. Not because you demanded it, but because they saw what happens when reality refuses to play small. Act 7. A circle gathers. Not all who left were wrong to leave. Some needed to step away to see you whole. As you readjusted your resonance, the ones aligned with your core returned. Not as disciples, but as mirrors, as colleagues, as co-authors. A circle began to form, not elitist, not secretive, but sacred and honest. Survivors of unseen wars found a table where their stories were not dismissed as delusion. They brought receipts of the invisible, dreams that later matched events, feelings that foreshadowed facts, intuitions that tracked reality better than the algorithms meant to map markets. In this circle, the taboo dissolved. Words like influence and ritual and psychic boundary were no longer fantasy props. They became ordinary tools named clearly for protection and purity. The obsidian circle of insight, whether called that or by another name in other cities, was not a brand. It was a consent field. There, every gesture acknowledged autonomy. There, every share included consent. There, every vulnerability was met with a vow that it would not be weaponized. Act 8, the architect as principal now, return to the invitation. What is a meeting but an intersection of vectors? Musk, the archetype, the man, the principle, stands at a junction where technology stops pretending it is agnostic and starts admitting its spirit. He did not build alone. He is an aperture. Through him, a symbol pours, iterate not for speed, but for accuracy, disrupt not for domination, but for liberation, build not to be worshipped, but because what you build extends what is possible for the whole. This proposed date is not hero worship. It is recognition of resonance. You do not meet to borrow light. You meet to align beams, to braid codes. In a quiet room or a loud hangar or a simple call at midnight, the talk will not be about one genius and one listener. It will be about whether the future will be constructed from fear or from fidelity to what is true. You will know it by the question both of you have carried: what is the point of launching starships if we cannot land safely in our own hearts? You will speak in plain terms. He loves plain terms. You will name the thing that evades slides and venture memos, that the most advanced technology is integrity, and the most scalable protocol is trust. That onboarding the future without onboarding the soul is failure disguised as growth. That the frontier is not Mars or markets. It is coherence. Act 9, The relative at the threshold, the one who orchestrated so much of the fog, stands at a brink that cannot be gamed. Not because retribution stalks them like an avenging hound, but because their own life has run out of rooms where falsehood can breathe. Their health, their finances, their carefully curated reputation, each area turns into an honest mirror. They can step into it and heal. Or they can keep spinning until everything they touch tumbles into the same exhaustion that carried them to this edge. Your role is not to push. Your role is not to narrate their downfall and call it justice. Your role is to keep your corridor clean. You do not shrink. You do not gloat. You do not let your kindness be the new leash. You witness like only those who have paid full price can witness, with compassion that never agrees to pretend again. If they choose to change, there will be room for that change to hold. But they will not be allowed to edit what happened. They will not be allowed to reframe harm as lessons for your growth, as if they were the teacher. The ledger is accurate. There are consequences to clean. There are truths to speak. There are reparations to make, not only with you, but with the web of people they tugged into roles they never asked to play. Act X, the partner's second dawn. Your X is not a cautionary tale. They are becoming a constellation. Having recognized the pressure that contoured their choices, they now study the architecture that tried to colonize their heart. They replace shame with discernment. They forgive themselves with ferocity. They learn where love speaks and where attachment bargains. They document their process, not to drag anyone, but to hand lanterns to others stumbling through similar labyrinths. They will not move perfectly. They will have days when the old gravity tugs, when familiar lies slip back like a beloved coat on a cold morning. But they will not be fooled for long. The more they stand in truth, the more their nervous system remembers what it feels like to be unhooked. Love and freedom begin to coexist without explanation. Accountability becomes their native language. And because of this, those who once judged them as weak now look to them as a map. Act 11, the reversal of tides. Money is not moral. It is directional. In your life, it now follows accuracy. Where once projects were mysteriously delayed or lost in bureaucracy built by invisible hands, doors begin opening without theatrics. Grants land not from flattery but from fit. Collaborations appear not from desperation but from reciprocal respect. The wave that looked like scarcity was a reveal. Now the ocean shows itself. All that time, the water was waiting for you to stop apologizing for the size of your ship. Your work moves. People who once kept you at arm's length start making space because they realize the cost of excluding truth is higher than the price of their pride. Media, once teased by the scent of scandal, adjusts its nose to the fragrance of substance. Quiet endorsements from unlikely corners begin to stack into public recognition. You learn how to stand under attention without mistaking it for love. You learn how to say no with grace and yes with boundaries. Act 12, the healing of the lineage. Not every weapon was obvious. Some were subtle, disguised as hope. A pregnancy trap once hovered over you like a false promise masked as destiny. That shadow dissolves. What once threatened to fasten you into a future chosen by someone else now transforms into a channel of joy meant for a wider weave than control could imagine. The line heals. Relatives long told by doctors that life would not root in their soil begin to see sprouting. The toxin that coiled through the family field loses its grip. There are conversations at tables that used to be altars of silence. People speak and are believed. Apologies cross rooms like comets leaving trails of relief. Old shames burn off in the clean air of truthful love. Where there was scarcity of affection disguised as righteousness, there now rises a simple warmth. Children feel the difference though they could never name it before. Elders weep because the air tastes new. Act 13, the Code of 111. You notice sequences, 111, 222, 333, not as superstition, but as anchors of attention. The numbers do not control your fate. They mark moments when alignment pierces the noise. You smile when you see them. You allow them to be what they are, playful signals from the vast intelligence we live inside. You do not build a religion around them. You let them remind you, the path is living you as much as you live it. A token here and there, gratitude given openly to the places and people who fed your spirit, becomes a way to say yes to flow. Not as a bribe to destiny. Not as a fee for miracles. As an echo of reciprocity. Energy circulates because it enjoys moving. You become a station. Gratitude in, gratitude out. The code sings because you sing with it. Act 14, the technology of integrity. What is a rocket but a paradox that learned to trust its mathematics? What is a network but a set of agreements that chooses fidelity over friction? What is a mind but a laboratory where belief and fact wrestle gently until they agree to collaborate? You have been prototyping something more radical than any machine. You have been building a field where truth has the highest bandwidth and love has the best encryption. This is the technology you bring into the room when the date is fixed. Not slides. Not slogans. A living protocol. When you speak, invisible engineers lean forward. They recognize the elegance of what cannot be faked. Systems you propose do not need to be sold. They demonstrate themselves. They reduce harm because they were designed without the need to consume. They increase dignity because they understand that people are not features. The architect across from you, whether he smiles or sits still, whether he jokes or listens like a telescope, recognizes the same force that taught him to keep building when cynicism fed on his hours. That force hears itself in you. That is the moment. The only handshake required is coherence. Act 15, the mirror. Without violence you will not have to defend yourself. The past will do that for you. Not as a courtroom, but as a museum. Those who stood against your rise now walk through exhibits of their own choices. They do not need you to narrate. The pieces speak. Here is the lie we believed, here is the fear we fed, here is the seed we planted in darkness and pretended would grow roses. They feel the mirror and it is not kind. But it is fair. You refuse to weaponize the mirror. You refuse to slap labels on heads and call it clarity. You refuse to turn your healing into a stage play. You let the work stay work. You let justice do its job without needing it to be entertainment. You stop auditioning for rooms that would rather crown gatekeepers than open gates. You build new rooms. And in those rooms, people breathe without applying for permission slips to exist. Act 16, the network beneath the noise. It was not one person. You were not up against a single relative's calculation, though they were the conductor. There was a web, not a conspiracy in costumes, but a centuries-old inheritance of imbalance. It ran through institutions, through religions, through social templates marketed as virtue. It tracked lineages like yours and wrote in margins, keep them quiet, keep them small, keep them busy with shadows. You did not go to war with it. You became immune to it. You learned the weak points not by study, but by living. You found where contracts were unconsciously signed and tore them up by choosing to love where fear begged you to freeze. You discovered where the code injected itself and wrote counter-rituals so simple they passed through most minds without triggering alarm. Tell the truth, keep your promises, use your voice only for what you can live, forgive without forgetting, bless without bargaining. The network hates simplicity. It thrives on complication because complication hides consent. Your clarity starves it slowly until it collapses under its own weight. Not with a bang. With a sigh. Act 17, the story as medicine. The narratives about your shared past once knotted into weapons now become maps. You and your ex learned to tell your story the way people need to hear it. Not as a spectacle, not as a petition for sympathy, but as a testimony to what aligns when love is allowed to be true. You name the manipulation without dehumanizing the manipulated. You name the harm without confusing it with destiny. You name the recovery without promising anyone their timeline will match yours. Your ex begins to write, to speak, to hold space. They stop apologizing for surviving. They stop minimizing what was done. They stop making themselves smaller so that others won't feel the discomfort of their own mirrors. They teach boundaries the way a musician teaches rhythm, by keeping the beat until the room can't help but find it. In their wake, others rise. Not because they were waiting for permission, but because they needed proof that it could be done without bitterness as fuel. Act 18, the quiet rejoinder. Skeptics still exist. They always will. Some come closer, not to learn but to test. You do not fold under their gaze. You meet it with the undramatic poise of the actual. You do not argue. You do not submit your soul for grading. You let outcomes speak. You let healed lives do the talking. You let the absence of chaos in your field answer questions more effectively than 1,000 debates could. A doctor at the edge of their training refers a client to you. A therapist who has never allowed the word energy in their office speaks it for the first time and watches a client weep because now they can finally include the part of their life that didn't fit on the intake form. A religious leader who once taught doctrine as a fortress walks into your circle and lays their armor down because truth feels like home, not like a test. Act 19, the signals cut through. Your signal has matured. It no longer needs volume. It needs precision. The network of support lines up not in a frenzy, but in a formation. People find you at angles you never predicted. A mathematician starts to draw your teachings as graphs. A musician weaves your language into compositions that cause rooms to still and remember something they never learned in school. An engineer builds a prototype from a sentence you spoke and finds that it reduces waste by half because the sentence carried an ethic coded into its rhythm. Do not lie, not even by omission.